Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on quite a journey, actually. We're heading back centuries to explore some really powerful truths from the poet Rumi. You've brought some fascinating excerpts today from the Masnavi, Book 1, and specifically a section with a tale called The Ball Parrot and the Monk. Seems like there's a lot packed in there.
Hmm.
So our mission for this deep dive really is to dig into the poetry, the symbols, the metaphors, and pull out those deep spiritual lessons. And crucially, how Rumi's ancient wisdom connects to personal growth, to our lives right now, how we can develop maybe better discernment.
Absolutely. And what's so brilliant about Rumi, I think, is how he takes these simple, almost everyday stories and uses them to unpack really complex ideas. Ideas about perception, how we judge things, the difference between what seems real and what is real. He's just a master of the parable, guiding us towards understanding not just what he's saying, but why it matters for our own inner journey. It's like getting a spiritual compass.
Okay, let's dive in then. You mentioned the story about a grocer and his parrot. How does that start?
All right, so we have this grocer, and he's got this companion in his shop, a green parrot. And this isn't just any parrot. Rumi tells us it talked, amusing all, could pronounce all human words, even chatted fluently with people and birds. Quite the character.
Sounds like it. A real personality in the shop. Sets the scene perfectly.
Exactly. And then one day, the parrot, just doing his parrot thing, hops down from its perch.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and accidentally knocks over a flask of rose oil. You can imagine in a grocery shop, that's quite a mess and expensive too.
Right. So the grocer comes back?
He comes back, sees the mess, his clothes get stained, and Rumi says our rage took hold. And in that rage, he strikes the parrot, hits it hard enough to leave it bald.
Wow, okay. That's intense. And the consequence.
Well, the parrot, totally understandably, just stops talking for days, goes completely silent. And this immediately shows, the instant fallout from a rash emotional reaction.
And the grocer, how does he react to the silence?
Oh, he's overcome with remorse, instantly regrets it. Rumi paints this picture of him tugging his beard, crying out, "Alas, my son of bounties hidden by a cloud."
So he feels the loss of the parrot's chatter, the sun in his shop.
Deeply. He even starts giving gifts to the poor, trying all sorts of things, showing the parrot wondrous tricks galore, just desperate to get it to speak again.
It's such a vivid image of regret, isn't it? Trying to undo the damage.
It really is. And that moment of remorse is key. It shows he's human, he made a mistake in anger. But it also sets up the main point about misjudgment, about how easily we jump to conclusions based on, well, very little.
Okay, so the parrot is silent, the grocer is repentant. Then what happens?
Then the story shifts. A monk walks by the shop, and he's described as wearing simple, woolen garb and bolder than a coot, completely bald.
And this is what gets the parrot talking again.
Amazingly, yes. The sight of this bald monk finally breaks the parrot's silence. But what it says is, well, it's the punchline and the lesson rolled into one.
What does it say?
It looks at the monk and blurts out, "How did you end up such a slaphead, friend? Did you like me a flask of oil upend?"
Oh my goodness. So the parrot assumes.
It assumes the monk must be bald for the same reason it is,
Hmm.
because he spilled some oil and got smacked.
And everyone laughs.
Yes, Rumi says everybody laughed because, as he puts it, it thought the monk its equal. It was daft.
Hmm.
That's the first big lesson right there. The parrot sees only the surface similarity, two bald heads, and completely misses the vastly different reality behind them.
That's brilliant. And Rumi connects this directly to a bigger spiritual point, doesn't he?
He does. He says straight up, "Don't you compare yourself with God's elite. Remember, souls just sound like soles of feet."
Okay, unpack that last bit. Souls and souls.
Yeah, it's apparently a clever wordplay in the original Persian. The word for souls, Anjan, sounds a bit like a word for worn-out souls. So he's saying don't confuse something profound, like a soul connected to God, with something mundane or worn out, just because they sound alike or look alike on the surface.
Don't judge by appearance or even superficial similarities in name or sound.
Exactly. He says this kind of false comparison is why the whole world's gone astray, why few recognize God's chosen saints today. People look at prophets or saints and say, oh, they're just human like us. They eat, they sleep.
Right. They see the human similarities and miss the divine connection.
Their blindness stops them from discerning it, as Rumi says, just like the parrot seeing only baldness.
It's a powerful reminder about our own potential blindness. So Rumi then gives more examples to hammer this home, right? This infinite gap.
Oh, absolutely. He uses some really vivid analogies. Which one stands out to you?
I think the one about the bees and wasps is fantastic.
Ah, yes. Both wasps and bees, those flowers, are nourishing.
Bees give back honey. Wasps, a painful sting. It's so clear. Same source, the flower, totally different outcome based on their inner nature.
Precisely. It's all about that inner essence versus the outward action or appearance.
He also has the one about the deer, right?
Hmm. All grazing deer look similar when they're young, but some give musk, while others just leave dung.
Again, similar appearance, vastly different product. And the two canes.
Yes. One sugar-filled, the other just holds air. It's relentless, isn't it? Driving home this point. Look deeper.
It really is. He says, with false comparisons, this world is packed.
And he contrasts people, too. Someone whose food, metaphorically, turns to shit, versus someone whose actions shine the light of God with it.
Or someone who grows more envious and tight versus another who bestows God's purest light. It's about the inner transformation, or lack thereof.
Exactly. It challenges us, doesn't it? Are we seeing the true effect and source of someone's actions, or just the superficial form?
Which leads to that really crucial question he poses. When opposites to us the same appear, like sweet and bitter water, both being clear, who can discriminate between the two?
Yeah, that's the heart of it. Clear water can be sweet or bitter. How do you tell?
And his answer, none but a man who's tasted truth will do.
It implies this knowing isn't just intellectual. It's experiential, intuitive, a kind of spiritual taste. You have to know the difference from the inside.
Like distinguishing real magic or miracles from trickery.
Exactly like that. Yeah. He brings up Moses and the magicians. They all seem to make rods into serpents.
Outwardly similar.
Very. But Rumi stresses the difference was vast, like night and day. Moses acted with God's grace. The magicians were just performing. One earned grace, the other's curses.
It's the source, the intention behind the action.
Absolutely. And he uses that striking image of unbelievers being like apes who just imitate human actions.
Thinking they've got it right.
But they're deluded because
Yeah.
they can't sense the way we see. They copy the form without the substance, the spirit. Moses' power came from God. Theirs was just a performance.
Which relates to what we see all the time, right? People copying techniques without understanding why they work or if they're even appropriate.
Definitely. And this flows right into his next point about hypocrites and true believers.
Ah, yes. They might perform the same religious acts.
Exactly. Although the hypocrites attend the prayer, it's just so they can start a quarrel there.
So they do the actions fasting, prayer, pilgrimage, giving alms.
But their intention is corrupt. They use these holy acts to actually make good men take up arms, to cause strife.
So the outward form is identical, but the inner reality is completely opposite.
Chalk and cheese, as Rumi puts it, or like people from two different cities, Merv and Ray. Distinct realities despite similar actions.
And the consequences reflect that inner difference.
Vastly different. Believers will be led to victory, while hypocrites will pay eternally. It's the essence that defines them and their fate.
So the label, like believer or hypocrite.
The label itself, the name believer, is itself worth naught, he says. It only signifies a person's thought, or rather, the reality it points to.
Don't judge the bowl by the label, judge what's inside.
Precisely. Don't blame the bowl for what's contained inside. The real meaning, the substance, comes from the mother of the book, the divine source, the ultimate truth.
It's always about getting back to that source, isn't it? Like with the seas.
That's another beautiful image. The planet's different seas aren't joined as one. God's fixed a gap they don't encroach upon.
They're distinct.
Yes, but their origin, however, is still the same. So the advice is, transcend them all and make their source your aim. Recognize the distinctions, but understand the unifying origin.
Okay, so recognizing these differences, seeing past the surface, requires discernment. How does Rumi suggest we cultivate that?
He uses a really powerful metaphor. The touchstone.
For testing gold.
Exactly. To check that it's not counterfeit, you'll need a touchstone to be sure it's gold indeed.
And where do we find this touchstone?
Ah, that's the key. If God should place a touchstone in your heart, you'll then tell doubt and certainty apart. It's an inner faculty.
Like an innate sensitivity. He mentions spitting out a hair.
Yeah, being able to sense just one hair among 100 morsels, if one should take care. It's about cultivating this inner awareness, this spiritual sensitivity.
So it's not just our regular senses. He calls those ladders of this world.
Right, useful for the physical realm. But then he says there are separate ladders God has hurled from heaven. Spiritual senses, perhaps? Intuition? Ways of knowing that go beyond the physical.
Like an inner compass guiding us.
Exactly. And this leads him to that interesting, almost jarring point about health.
Right, the physicians look after the body.
But just God's friend can save your soul from hell. And then the paradox. Good health's equated with a strong physique. A healthy soul will make your body weak.
That sounds counterintuitive. A healthy soul makes the body weak.
Well, think about it in terms of spiritual discipline. Often, pursuing spiritual growth involves detaching from worldly comforts, fasting, vigils, controlling desires, things that might seem like weakening the body or the ego's hold on the physical.
Okay, so it's not necessarily literal sickness, but a letting go of physical attachment.
That seems to be the idea. He says, bodies are wrecked along the mystic way. For their destruction, treasures brought as pay. It sounds harsh.
It does.
But then he gives those analogies. Knocking down your house for gold, only to be rebuilt. Or draining a river to refill it with purest water.
So it's a necessary destruction, a clearing away for something better.
Exactly, a purposeful dismantling, like he flays your skin to find the blade inside, fresh skin will heal the wound. Or raising old castles to rebuild them with 1,000 towers.
It's about transformation, even if the process looks destructive from the outside.
Precisely. What seems arbitrary is actually necessary on the spiritual path. It bewilders those who are traveling it, he says.
But it leads to a kind of spiritual drunkenness or ecstasy, the amazement that love's drunks have learned.
Yes, a deeper state of understanding born from that transformative confusion. It all depends on where you're facing.
What do you mean?
He contrasts the one who faces the beloved constantly with the one who chooses just himself to see.
Ah, so your focus determines your experience and your ability to discern.
Seems so. His advice is, observe which way the people choose to turn, while serving others learn how to discern. Service and outward focus help home that inner sight.
Which brings us back to the need for constant vigilance, doesn't it? The world is full of potential deceptions.
Absolutely. Rumi warns quite starkly. The devils make themselves look just like men. Don't shake hands with just anyone again.
Now, devils here, probably not literal horned beings in our context.
Unlikely for most of us. I think it represents any misleading influence that looks harmless or even good. Think about persuasive rhetoric that lacks substance, or charming people with bad intentions, or even misleading ideas that seem attractive.
Like the hunter's whistle he mentions.
Perfect example. It sounds like calling from a friend. Friendly, inviting.
But it leads the bird inside his trap to meet its end. A powerful warning about not trusting every appealing call.
Definitely. And it's not just supernatural devils. He warns about people too.
Right, the wretch who might steal the words of dervishes to chant tall tales to simple audiences.
Someone using the language of wisdom or spirituality, but without the substance, just to manipulate or impress.
So the challenge is always to discern. Do their actions spread light, or are they false pretenders who just distort what's right?
It's critical. That's why he brings up the historical figures, Musailim the liar versus Ahmad, the Prophet Muhammad.
One claimed prophethood falsely, the other was genuine. How do you tell the difference, according to Rumi?
It comes down to the scent, the essence. The wine of love's flask smells of musk that's pure, while other wines all stink of foul manure.
Wow, that's blunt, but clear. The inner truth has a fragrance that falsehood lacks.
It's a visceral test, isn't it? Appealing to a deeper sense than just sight or hearing.
What a journey indeed. Just from that simple story of a bald parrot and a monk, we've gone through layers of meaning about perception, intention, judging offenses.
And that core message keeps coming back, doesn't it? The need for that inner touchstone, that spiritual discernment.
To see past the surface similarities, the false comparisons that Rumi says the world is packed with.
Yeah, it's not just abstract philosophy. He's pushing us to think about how we actually live. Who do we trust? How do we evaluate information? How do we understand our own motivations?
It's about cultivating that inner radar for what's genuine, what's true, what's musk, and what's, well, not.
Exactly.
So for you listening, maybe the takeaway is this. Next time you encounter something or someone that seems familiar or makes a quick judgment easy, just pause. Ask yourself, is this the parrot seeing another bald head and jumping to conclusions? Am I looking at the surface, or am I trying to sense the deeper reality, the musk or the dung?
It's that invitation to cultivate inner wisdom, to go beyond the superficial.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Rumi's incredible insights. Keep questioning, keep learning.
And keep looking for that truth beyond the surface.